There's something quite unique about consciousness. Maybe I should have started with this. That it's not a publicly observable phenomenon, right? I can't look inside your brain and see your feelings and experiences. We know about consciousness not from experiments, not from looking down a microscope or a particle collider. You know, we know about consciousness just by being conscious, by being immediately aware of our own feelings and experiences. Now, you might say, well, you know, science deals with things you can't observe all the time. You know, fundamental particles, quantum wave functions that physicists talk about, or maybe even other universes we've been talking about a moment ago. But there's a crucial difference with consciousness, because in all these other cases, you're theorizing about things you can't explain in order to explain what you can observe. Sorry, let me say that again. You're theorizing about things you can't observe, like fundamental particles, in order to explain what you can observe, right? That's ultimately the aim of science, right? Explaining experimental observations. In the unique case of consciousness, the thing we are trying to explain is not publicly observable. You can't observe feelings. You know about them because you have them and you're just immediately aware of them. So it's this weird extra thing we know about independent of experiments. But then we've got to put it together with the experiments, right? So we know about feelings because we feel them. But then we know about brains because we study them. And you've got to plug them together somehow. But because it's not publicly observable, you can't pin down the total answers just from doing experiments. So you've just got to explore these different possibilities.
Okay, so what's your view on consciousness then?
So I defend a strange sounding view called panpsychism, that consciousness goes all the way down to the fundamental building blocks of reality. So panpsychists needn't think necessarily everything is conscious, but the idea is that the fundamental things that make up our universe are conscious. Maybe fundamental particles like electrons and quarks have incredibly simple forms of conscious experience, and that the very complex experience of the human or animal brain is somehow built up from these simpler forms of conscious experience at the level of fundamental
just
physics.
To stop you really quick, just to so I can imagine it better. Are we saying that then everything in the universe is suffused with consciousness in a way? Does that mean that sorry for being so silly, but that my shoe feels something when I put it on?
Not quite, not exactly. It doesn't mean your shoe feels something, but maybe that your shoe is made up of tiny things that feel things.
Okay, that's even more tricky.
But those tiny things, it's not like they feel the kind of things a human being feels, right? It's not like we're saying the electrons are feeling existential angst or wondering if it's Tuesday yet, right? Human consciousness is obviously highly evolved, highly complex, the result of millions of years of evolution. But consciousness comes in all shapes and sizes, right? The consciousness of a sheep is much simpler than that of a human being. The consciousness of a snail is simpler still. As we move to simpler forms of life, we find simpler and simpler forms of conscious experience. So for the panpsychist, this keeps going down, right down to the fundamental building blocks of matter, which have incredibly simple forms of experience, according to panpsychism, to reflect their incredibly simple nature.
Thank you for listening. I really, really appreciate it. Again, this podcast has no sponsors, no production team, and no editors. It's just little me, and as such, I'm at the mercy of you lovely folks watching and listening. So please do subscribe on YouTube, click that little bell thing or whatever, it helps. Follow on Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you can. Also, I don't want to sell you like an atrocious t-shirt that you don't really need. So if you can, and most of all, if you want, of course, please support me on Patreon. And here I have to express my eternal gratitude to my patrons on Patreon, aka the producers of this show. As always, without you, Tovarishice, this show simply would not exist at all. So a massive thank you to Goran Ivasic, Andrzej Sever, Ole, Marin Ferrara, Aljaž, Štrole, Aida, Mancian, Miha Medved, Medinho, Goran, Gordan, Lorenzo, Jurečuk, Mila, Carmen, Veronica, and Tai Chi. You guys are the best.